Hello, in this screencast presentation I'm going to be introducing some of the fundamentals of project evaluation to help you with your assignments. I'll be covering the fundamentals of evaluation in terms of why we evaluate and how project evaluation is applied in practice. Then we'll think about where we start with project evaluation by looking at problems and aims, moving on to how we assess value in terms of looking at the actions of projects, and measure the success by using indicators. And finally, we'll look at how you can use theory to deepen your analysis of a project evaluation. Evaluation is a fundamental part of the wider project management cycle, and there's a lot of literature and lots of videos and information you can watch on project management. But evaluation is a particular element of that, which is where you kind of reflect back on the success of various different elements of the project stage. Evaluation is recommended at the start of a project to kind of evaluate the aims and objectives to make sure that the fundamental basis for the project is sound, all the way through to reviewing once you've completed the project and looking back and seeing whether it was successful and whether there are changes that could have been made that would have made it more successful. I've worked on evaluation projects in local government as a researcher, reviewing national policy programmes and working for things like food banks to evaluate their effectiveness in terms of different initiatives that they've tried. So organisations across the private sector, public sector, and the charitable sector often often include a lot of evaluation work. It's definitely a very useful transferable skill across a number of different sectors. So we'll start off by looking at the start of the project, the problems and the aims. One of the first things you have to do before you start to try and evaluate whether a project's been successful is to see whether it actually understands and clearly articulates what the rationale for the project was in the first place. So a project is defined as something that has a kind of clear aim and a clear is bounded in terms of a purpose. So it's not just something that's going to be happening forever and ever and ever. It's something that's been implemented with a particular purpose. And therefore, you have to be able to identify what that is, because to evaluate whether a project has been successful or whether it's well designed, you have to know what it's trying to do. And so it's actually quite an important thing, and often something that projects don't do very well, is to clearly articulate the nature of their problem and how they are actually going to address that. So when a project has a rationale, it will normally identify the problem that needed fixing, which was the rationale for the project. But then it should also say how it aims to address the problem. So when we're talking about a project aim, it's what is it ultimately stating that it's going to try to do to address the problem that it has identified in order to justify its existence. And this diagram here is a useful one to think about the way that actually the project process is cyclical. It's supposed to return back to the problem. So you start off with a problem which justifies the need for a project. The project then states an aim that should directly lead from that problem. So this is how we're going to address it. It should then think about how it's actually going to deliver some actions that are measurable, so some indicators, and some targets, so how much it's hoping to achieve and maybe by a particular date. And then it should have some clear idea about what the outcome is. In other words, what does it look like when the problem has been solved? And the outcome should clearly link to that problem that was addressed in the first place. Quite often this doesn't happen in project design and project implementation. I've worked on lots of different evaluations where you start off with a problem and then the project design runs off almost in a linear fashion, and you end up with some outcomes that don't clearly relate back to that problem. So you can't evidence, even if the project seems like it's been really successful, you can't actually evidence how it has met its aims or addressed that original problem. That's something to really think about when structuring an evaluation of a project. How clearly does it follow through this cycle? The next stage of the project, once you've identified the problem and the aims, is what the project is actually going to do. So this is where we get into terminology like actions, or sometimes people call them deliverables. So you know what you want to achieve, you know why you're there, why the project exists in the first place. So what are you actually going to do? And one of the things for you to think about when you're evaluating a project is how clear is it to identify these things, these actions and deliverables? In other words, what is the work of the project? How is it going to actually try and meet its aims? And you can also make some kind of evaluation, some comments, some analytical comments on whether or not you think these actions are appropriate and likely to be effective. And this is where you, as subject experts, as you are in the field that you're studying at the moment, you understand the nature of the problem. You've researched the nature of the problem. You've read around the subject, and you understand the complexity of the problem that's being addressed here. So whether that's how you would design places better for health, or how you would implement a project to address ecological health of an area or health of a population, that kind of thing. So if you understand the nature of the problem, then you can make some assessments as to whether the actions that are being suggested by this project are likely to be effective. And you can refer to the literature to help you do that. We'll talk about that more later. Indicators and targets are the really sort of practical and applied elements of a project. So an indicator is a unit of measurement. Sometimes you may hear people refer to KPIs, which is a key performance indicator. And it's some kind of jargon that's used quite a lot in the private sector, in charities, and in the public sector as well. But KPIs, or indicators, are the unit of measurement. So how you know what is it you're looking for, what is it you're going to try and count or measure in order to decide whether this project's effective. Identification of indicators is one of the areas where, when I've been evaluating projects, this is what I'm often identifying, is that there may be a really sound rationale and the project may have some really clear aims, but the way in which it's actually trying to measure the effectiveness of its actions becomes a little bit more difficult. And I did try looking for a nice neat graphic that would summarize some kind of health and nature related indicators, but couldn't find one. So this is just an example, but from a different area, where you can actually see that you have kind of a general aim, and then what you're trying to achieve, the key impact, and the key performance indicators. So what is it that you're actually going to measure in order to be able to evaluate your success? Indicators and targets really answer the question, how will we know if this project is working? And that is a fundamental element of project research and project design, and a really important question that an evaluator needs to ask. So how do we know it's being successful? If you understand your problem really well and you understand what should work, how are you then going to measure whether or not your project is effective? So an example from the area of kind of ecological health would be, so that 5 should be a percentage sign, I've just noticed that. Percentage of mown grass converted to pollinator planting, for example. So we would know that if we're trying to improve the ecological health of an area, then we need to convert areas that are sort of low in biodiversity to areas that are high in biodiversity. So you may have sort of increasing the percentage of transfer from this one medium to another. And then you need a target, and the target is really the quantity of that indicator. So how much are you trying to achieve? So if you know that converting mown grass to pollinator planting is the key indicator for improving biodiversity, how are you going to, what's the target? So this would be, one of the things that we know is a good kind of indicator and measure of biodiversity would be insect count. So if you have an area that's offers no biodiversity and doesn't attract pollinators, you're not likely to have a very high count. So in order to measure success, you need to pick the right kind of target and the right kind of indicator. So you could set the target for a 20% increase in insect count. So you do some insect counts at the beginning of the project, and then you say, we're going to do this particular work, and at the end of the project, we're going to go and do another insect count and see whether it's been successful. And that is the kind of clear, articulated, and measurable indicators and use of indicators and targets. In order to take your evaluation beyond a sort of tick box exercise really and start to deepen your analysis, we expect you to use theory or use the information that you get from your wider reading, from reading both academic texts but also evaluation toolkits, reports, that kind of thing. So relevant literature from a range of different kind of areas. And here are some ways in which you can use that at different stages of the project evaluation. So in terms of setting the stage for the problem, so how do you understand the problem that this project has defined? And this is somewhere that you can really show your depth of knowledge of the situation of the problem that this project is addressing. Because really, when you are stepping in to evaluate a project, you're stepping in the role of a subject expert. So you're saying, I understand the context, the nature of this project, and I'm going to come in and see whether I think that this project is effective, has been designed well, has been executed well, if it's already happened. So one of the things you can sort of do is, what problem does the project claim as a rationale? Does it clearly identify and articulate one? And then how can you show your deeper understanding of that through references to your wider reading, to the literature? If the project hasn't identified a clear problem, then that could be something that you discuss as well, and maybe you can try and infer from the way in which the project has set aims what the problem might be that it's trying to address, and you can discuss that and again make some references to your literature. In terms of the aims, first of all, can you clearly identify project aims? If you can't, that's something, again, to mention as part of an evaluation. It's very hard to measure and evaluate the success of a project if you have nothing to evaluate against. So you're always looking for what the aims and objectives and targets of a project are to help you understand whether or not it's been successful. So first of all, are they clearly identified? And then can you comment on whether you think they're appropriate? Do they resonate with the things that you have read about the nature of that problem? Do you think that they've made a sensible and appropriate kind of range of aims there, based upon your knowledge of the subject, based upon your understanding of the problem from your reading? Then when we get into actions and deliverables, again, does the work clearly address the problem? Can you see a logical progression from the setting out of the problem, the establishing of the project aims, and the things that the project is doing to try and address the problem? If you can't see a logical progression, you think that they actually don't join up, that's something for you to comment on. And the theory, the reading around the subject, really gives you the supporting evidence about what kinds of actions are likely to bring about success. So you know a lot about the nature of the problem, be that a kind of human health or a wider kind of environmental health problem or a structural problem that a project might be trying to address. Are the things that it's doing likely to actually address that problem? Can you comment on that critically by referring to your reading? Finally, targets and indicators. Does the project identify clear targets and indicators to measure the success of its project? Do they sort of match the ones that you can identify in your existing evaluation toolkits or subject literature? Can you suggest better ones? Or maybe you don't think the project does identify clear targets and indicators, in which case you can refer to your knowledge of this subject and again identify some suitable indicators from your reading that you could use to make recommendations for how the project could be improved. So there's a number of different ways that you could do that. Again, it's kind of it's really using the reading as evidence and to support the claims that you're making as a subject expert when you're evaluating the project. So I hope that's been useful. Thanks very much.